It's May 25th. I'm Sue Cohen with the San Marcos Heritage Association, and we have the pleasure of interviewing Roy Hotz today.
Roy Hotz Jr., because I'll make comment about my dad, who's also Roy Hotz.
Well, tell me about your younger years and how you ended up in San Marcos.
Well, my mother went to school here at the time it was called Southwest Texas State Teachers College. And her mother died in 1933, and as a result, she dropped out of school.
And her name was?
Was Lydia York. My mother started teaching school at a small one-room school in Smiley after her mother died in 1933. And as a result of teaching a 2-year certificate, of which was a provision certificate, she had to maintain summer hours to keep her toward her degree, which she did every summer. And then after my parents married in 1936, and I was born in 37, then we started coming up here as a family every summer. And stayed with there were rooms to rent at the time around the university and around town, which they did. And Daddy would take summer jobs while she was here. And somewhere along the route in about 1939 probably, Daddy started working for the ice plant, and he was making 25 cents an hour.
Where was that ice plant?
The ice plant is where it's on the dam on Ocarina Springs, which is right now the Saltgrass restaurant, I think. And he found that he preferred that to farming, which he was doing in Smiley. And so in late 39 or 1940, we all moved up here.
And who was we all? How many of you?
Just my mother and dad and I at the time.
And your dad was Roy Hotz Sr.?
That's correct. And he was working for the ice plant at the time. And of course, the economy still was not real good. It was still in the midst of the Depression, and he got laid off. And just the day after he got laid off, a friend of his who worked for the LCRA came and said, "Roy, there's a vacancy at the LCRA. Do you want a job?" Papa said yes, and he went down there, and he was hired for 35 cents an hour. And he said, "I got it made." So he spent the next 40 years with the LCRA. And in 1940, my brother was born, and we were living up on Chestnut Street at the time. There's 2 rock houses up there, and they're still there. And then we lived for a short while in maybe 6 months in Lockhart. Well, there was a change with the LCRA and PEC or something like that at the time. And then in 1940, we moved to where we lived out on Ranch Road 12. From then on, my brother had been born just prior to us moving out to Ranch Road 12.
Was that outside the city limits?
Well, it's very interesting. Our physical address was the 3rd house on the left past the cemetery, and our telephone number was 76M. Now, there were 2 other lines on. There's a party line. There was 76J and I think 76L. And you picked up the phone, somebody was talking, out of courtesy, you hung up, but sometimes you didn't. And so, you kind of knew what was going on the neighborhood just from that. But another distinction that I remember them having is that our house, they were given our address, it was like 5 miles from the courthouse, and on Ranch Road 12. And we played up and down Ranch Road 12 all the time on the highway. You might see 2 cars a day, and we had slingshots and everything. And highway gravel was the perfect to use in the slingshots, so we kept loaded up on that as kids. It was very interesting in that when my daddy first started working for the LCRA, that they had no radios in their vehicles. So Papa would get a phone call, say at midnight, to go to Ulen or Needlewall or somewhere for an outage, and then come back. And in the meantime, when he'd come back, he'd gotten another call, so then he'd have to go back out again. And I don't remember when they got radios, but I think it was probably after the war, sometime 1945, 46, 47, that they finally got one-way radios that they could call them from the office, but they could not call back. And at least that they could get to them before they came back telephone. My I started first grade in 1943, and Lenore Geeson was my first grade teacher, and Lenore is still alive. She's in a local nursing home, but she's not very, you can't communicate with her
She's
very well.
in her late 90s.
Yes, well, I'm thinking she would be more than that, because my dad would have been 100 last year, and she's either 99 or 100, one of the two.
And where was the school that?
Well, this was, I guess they called it San Marcos Elementary School. It was directly across from the university. It's where Evans Auditorium is, and I think Evans Auditorium is still there.
How did you get to school every day from Rancho Twin?
Well, we rode a bus. We had a school bus. And one of the most memorable things that happened to me in the first grade that I will never forget, ever, 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 is that at the time we had a specific kind of tablet, an Indian chief tablet that we had to use to bring to school. And it had to be a certain size. Well, as it turned out, that I had a different size one day in class. And Ms. Geeson asked me where I got that tablet. And I said, oh, my mother bought it. And she said, oh, she did. I thought your mother bought just what you needed. And I said, oh, yeah, she bought it, that's for sure. She said, oh, goodness, I may have to check with her. Well, bad news. Well, as it turned out, I had kind of borrowed that tablet from another student and we had little lockers in there. I had kind of borrowed that tablet. And so my mother marched me up there, and I had returned the tablet, apologized for my misdeeds, and apologized to the student from whom I had borrowed it. Fortunately, I don't think I used anything out of it, but let me tell you that I've never had that occur in my life again since. I mean, it was memorable. And I don't know whether Ms. Geeson remembered it or not, but I had a chance to talk with her, when she was about 80 or something, but I didn't approach it. I was hoping she had forgotten to. Anyway,
Wow.
Evans Auditorium, and we went through the 6th or 7th grade there, and then went across the street to what is, at the time was the junior high school on the college campus, and it was kind of the last two buildings there. There was really a close-knit community of school children. After I came back here, I practiced medicine in Kingsville for 30 years, and then came back here and practiced another 15. And when I got back here, I would run into people who rode the school bus with us. And it was an interesting thing about school buses at the time. My school bus driver was Mr. Cruz, and my third grade school teacher was Mrs. Cruz. And I just found out within the last 4 or 5 years that a former patient of mine, and turned out to be a very good friend, Mr. Cruz was her daddy. And she was Corinda Miller. She married, can't remember his name. He lives out on the other side of Redwood. He was a big farmer out there. Leonard Miller, and it's spelled Moeller. But anyway, Mr. Cruz was her daddy. Well, we had our school bus was just a regular school bus. You know, people got on and rode the bus. And there was one student on there who was quite irascible from time to time, and he just lived down the road from us. And he was getting smart with Mr. Cruz and wouldn't mind him and this kind of thing. Mr. Cruz stopped the bus, put him off. He said, walk home. his name was Dickie Tiller. And there is an estate there, the Coors Road on Branch Road 12. Miss Coors was his grandmother. Well, about 50 years later, this guy walks into my office here, and his name is Tiller, Richard Tiller. And I said, "Are you Dickie Tiller who got kicked off the Mr. Scrooge's school bus?" He said, "I am Dickie Tiller, and you must be Roy who lived up the street from us." I said, I am, and I was on the school bus the day that Mr. Scrooge kicked you off.
Did he straighten up and fly right after that?
No, no, he did not. And then there was another interesting thing, that there was a guy who had, after the war, who had this car body with a AT-7 aircraft body mounted on it. No wings, no propeller or anything, but the body mounted on this thing that he drove up and down the road all the time, drove it everywhere. It was this airplane that he just drove around. His name was Ray Coors. He was Miss Coors' son, and I think Ray is still here. And comes in the office, walks this guy by the name of Ray Coors. I said, "Are you the Ray Coors that drove the airplane up and down the street in front of my house?" He said, "I am." Amazing. And then there was another guy who rode his horse named Bobby Watkins. Now, Bobby was older than us, but he had juvenile diabetes. And at that time, diabetes was very poorly controlled. All we had was some very, as we had insulin. Insulin was introduced at about 1929, 1930, but it really didn't become available to the public probably until the early 40s, and it was only in a soluble form that was didn't last very long. You had to take multiple shots at a time. So people who had juvenile diabetes didn't grow very much, and Bobby was pretty small. And we were playing down on the road, as we usually do, in front of the house, and Bobby comes riding his horse up. And I said, "Bobby, what's going on?" He said, "Oh, I'm riding on into town getting my horse shod." And I thought, oh man, I can't imagine why anybody wanted to get his horse shot. See, I heard him say he was going to go get his horse shot. So why would anybody want to kill his horse? So as soon as he left, I went to the house and told Mama. I said, "Mama, Bobby Watkins is going to go get his horse shot." She said, "No, he's not. He's going to get his horse shod." That means he's going to put horseshoes on him. So anyway, that's just part of what went on. And the area across from our house right now are apartment buildings, but it was a big, huge gravel pit at the time. And there was kind of a junk place that people would haul some of their trash, not household garbage, but there'd be old boxes and that kind of stuff. Well, when we got up in the morning, and this was in the summer, and my sister was born in '46, and she had one of these cloth strollers. Mother put my sister in there and put a box of Hi-Ho crackers and a quart of water and say, "Okay, boys, she's yours." So we would take off with that cart and we would leave with my sister. And we'd go across the road over to that gravel pit, and we would build houses out of those boxes, and there was all kinds of stuff. We had forts, unimaginable. There were water pits over there. We could throw rocks in all day. And we'd come back at noon, and of course you can imagine my sister, she'd been drinking this water and hadn't had a diaper change, or if she'd start fooling around, we'd give her a cracker and give her some water, and she was perfectly satisfied. We'd just go push her everywhere she went, and she stayed with us. And so we'd get her home, and it was like, "Okay, you're here." And she'd Mom take the hose and hose us all off.
How old were you and your brother when you were watching after your sister?
Well, probably 10, and my brother was 7. I was 8 years older than my sister, so I was probably 10 years old, and he was 7. And man, we hooked it up and we left. And a lot of times, if we came home, we always had to take a nap in the afternoon, and Mother took a nap. And we were supposed to take a nap, but we
almost had to. The houses weren't air conditioned. It was hot.
Oh, absolutely. And so we'd get out, and we had a war with our neighbors going on with slingshots and this kind of thing. We had a piece of tin set up there. And we'd hide behind the tin, and they'd hide behind theirs, and you'd hear that rocks hit that tin, bang, bang, bang. And fortunately, nobody ever got killed. It's a wonder. But anyway, that if during the day we outside and we were hungry, the kitchen window was right by was near the sidewalk on the side. But Mother would make a sandwich for us and open the window, stick her arm out and hand the sandwich out to us, and we'd get the sandwich and go. Now we had 3 dogs. Now there was one thing that you were absolutely sure of. You held your sandwich up here, because if you forgot and accidentally dropped your hand, your sandwich was gone.
And you didn't get another one.
Never get another one. So, you know, you didn't share, if you didn't want to share with the dogs, you kept your sandwich up here, and they did it real fast. So the dog. Anyway, that my daddy was started out as a lineman for the area, and so he knew everybody everywhere, and so people called him by name, and he knew everybody, and he had this network of spies that kept track of me. Didn't matter where I did or what I did or how I did, Papa found out. And he was always real subtle too about it. He said, "Hey, how'd your date go the other night?" "It was great." I said, "Did you go anywhere besides town?" "Wasn't supposed to leave town in the car." "No, sir." "How was the movie?" I said, "It was great." You know, he said, "You know, it's a funny thing. Somebody in Lockhart told me that they saw that green 47 Dodge over there. Wonder why." And I said, "I've been busted." The punishment wasn't bad. I mean, you just didn't get to use the car again, you know.
So you were supposed to stay in town with
right.
the car.
That's right.
Now you graduated in 1955?
1955.
And how many were in your graduating class?
I think 100, more or less.
And there's still a core group of y'all?
Yeah, we still meet on Tuesdays, Tuesday morning, and have somewhat civil conversations. Sometimes it gets a little rowdy. But they haven't thrown us. We meet at IHOP, and they haven't thrown us out yet.
And what kind of activities were you involved in high school?
Well, I was in the band and some clubs. I can't remember exactly what they were. I wasn't involved in sports. I worked around town a lot.
Oh, where'd you work?
Well, I worked at Duke and Ayers. Well, I actually first started working at Hilburn's Pharmacy, which was on the north side of the square. And Mr. Hilburn, I think I couldn't drive. My mother would pick me up at night when I was off. And I'd walk from school down and I was a kind of soda jerk, cleanup guy, and kind of deal. And 35 cents an hour, and I remember that I think my first check was like $7.50 or something. I was in the money. And then I worked at Duke and Ayers for several years, and Mr. Hugh, I just lost it right there. But anyway, he was a very rigid guy, real fair guy to work for, a good guy to work for. And he sat up there. There was kind of the boss man's place up in there, and he sat up there and he watched people, everybody in the store and all the employees. And he assigned me some job to do, and I was always quite meticulous, I thought, about doing my job. But this one time brought some criticism from him about, don't remember exactly what it was, but I said, Hugh, golly, Mr. whatever his name, will come to me.
This was at the Duke and Ayers?
Yeah, at the Duke and Ayers, which was on the corner of the north side of the square, across from State Bank.
And that was a happening place, apparently. That's where everybody wanted to go.
Well, it was the local 5 and dime store, you know, and they had anything in the world you wanted, and a few things like window shades and stuff like that. And he said, "Roy, I want to tell you, I'm not paying you to think. I'm paying you to do just what I asked you to do." "Yes, sir." So, you know, I remembered that too. Then later on, I worked for the LCRA, and you know, it was San Marcos was an interesting town in that the life of San Marcos was centered on the square. There were businessmen around the square who had their coffee meetings every morning, and they discussed local politics and even some international politics. And I can remember during the war that the rationing that took place, and I don't remember that we were especially deprived of anything. We never, sugar I think was probably the big thing, and we never did use much sugar anyway that I recall. I know Mother never did put as much sugar in anything that I ate that I wanted, but she said, oh, you don't need that much sugar. But anyway, you had gasoline stamps and rationing, and during the war we had stamp books at school that we would buy stamps that would contribute to the war effort. And I found mine not too long ago that you buy a stamp for 10 cents, but you have to remember that 10 cents was a lot of money at that time.
Mm-hmm. They had patriotic parades around the square back then.
You know, I don't remember
stuff like that.
No, I don't remember that. I don't remember that. But I remember that that everyone. I don't remember anyone not. Let me put it this way: I don't remember anyone voicing criticism of the war. I mean, no one liked the war, of course, but Mother had 2 brothers involved. My daddy had 3 brothers. My daddy never did serve because of his job. He had a monthly deferment, and it was for national defense because he was a lineman and worked for a power company. I mean, and that's the only reason. But his deferral was every month. So in the event that ever changed, then he was gone. It seemed to me like everyone, you came to town on Saturday, primarily. People would sit in the cars on the square and visit with people who were going by, people you didn't see often. Prolonged communication by telephone was not done. You just didn't hang on the telephone. Seemed that everybody read the newspaper, and it was so interesting that thinking back about if you were a local, everyone knew you, especially if you were in an age where that and you know, most everybody that I remember in my age group had a job of some kind. And if you went looking for a job, I mean, you went to all of these places and you said, I want a job. You didn't ask how much you paid. You didn't ask for any benefits. You just said, I want a job. And I think I got a lot of my jobs because they got sick and tired of me coming by, you know. And I always had a job of some kind. But you knew everybody, and as Mr. So-and-so and Miss So-and-so.
You didn't call an adult by their first name?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
And you said yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am?
You bet. You bet. And no one said, don't call me ma'am because I'm not old. You know, I had a discussion with one of my nurses who is not a local, but she's been in Texas a long time. And in fact, I talked to her today. She's from Minnesota. And I said, now, Mary, don't you recognize that is a Texas or Southern honorific? Has nothing to do with age, status, or anything. It's just an honorific. She said, well, never thought of it like that. But that's all it is. It's just somebody being polite. And you know, it was very pleasurable to be downtown and to speak to people on the street, and people know who you were. If you went into Mother was big about sending me into the grocery store about go in and get this, go in and get that, and when you'd go in there, they said, I want such a, I know that's what your mama wants, and so, you know.
You didn't take any money in with you, did you?
Well, we did. We did.
Because a lot of people had
Yeah.
charge
Oh
accounts.
yes. Oh yeah. It was. In fact, I was just talking to a friend of mine who was a year ahead of us, who worked in one of the local grocery stores a long time. Was talking about all the accounts that they had. And our high school years were just absolutely, looking back on it, I think marvelous. We made friendships, of course, that are still last to today, and there were a group of us guys. There was Henry and John and Chuck McGee, John Stewart, Chuck McGee, Henry Kyle, Bill White, Ike White, Franklin Rogers. We kind of hung out. All these guys would end up at our house and eating around our table. Mother always had cornbread and beans or something, just to eat beans.
And y'all lived the whole time out Rancho 12?
Yes, ma'am.
What'd y'all do for what made it so idyllic? What kind of fun things did you remember doing as a high school kid?
The interesting thing that we did nothing mean. We did some prankish things, but nothing mean.
Right.
I would have never destroyed a thing. We could hunt most any place we wanted to hunt. We just would say. Now, my dad, knew all these people, and he said, "Now, if y'all want to go hunt, Mr. So-and-so said y'all can go out there and hunt." So we would go out there and hunt. And if we would, occasionally, if it were convenient, if it weren't too early, we'd go by the house and say, "We're going to go hunt." He said, "Go ahead on, I know you, Daddy." And
What were y'all
pick up your
what
shotgun
kind of
shells.
things were y'all hunting?
But birds and ducks, and we had there was a time when we were kind of spelunkers. There were a group of us who loved to go in the local caves, and there were a lot of them at the time. And there was John and Henry and Ike and Chuck and myself, and we had some.
Tell me about that. How did y'all do that?
Well, lights, at the time, batteries were horrible. It didn't last any time. And the biggest problem in spelunking is light.
Right.
So we used, if we had batteries and flashlight, we used those, but I don't know if you're familiar with the old carbide headlights. Well, they're famous for bubbling over and running down your face. And the carbide in water produces acetylene, and this is what the light was, so you'd mount this on your head. And then you always either didn't have enough water, you had too much water, and the light always went out, or whatever it was. And so the LCRA used, when they had emergencies, they had these emergency road flares. I don't know, the railroad flares, they have a spike on the end, and they're magnesium flares. You break the top off and slide it, and it lights. And the highway patrol used to use them a lot on the lights for wrecks and trucks before they started using reflectors. Well, I had this brilliant idea that if we were going to go down, and we would, Ezel's Cave is closed off now. It's where
I was wondering if that's where y'all went.
Well, that's one of them. There's another one called McDonald's Cave.
That is so neat.
And Ezel's Cave is where the blind salamanders are.
Right.
And we would go into there a bunch. And we never did.
Did your parents know y'all were doing this?
Yeah, sure.
And you had ropes, or?
Yeah, we outfitted ourselves properly, and
That is an idyllic time. I mean, y'all did something that now you can't do.
That's right. And so I decided that
Wow.
I solved the light problem with this magnesium flare. Well, burning magnesium is toxic. So we're in this cave, and I lighted this flare, and it illuminated the whole cave just like you would. But then we started coughing, and we all got out. But it's a wonder that we didn't die in there. It's crazy. But anyway, we didn't use the flares anymore. But one of my favorite stories, if John didn't tell it, that we were in McDonald's Cave, and we were inching through this. There was one hole, and I was the biggest guy, and I was inching through this thing that I could just barely get through. And I'm not claustrophobic, but when you're stretched out like this, inching yourself along like an inchworm, these things cross your mind. And so John said, well, look at this. We have all of this piles and piles and rolls of bat guano here. My mother would love to have bat guano for her garden, or his flower beds. So he took off his pants and he filled his pants with bat guano. And then he was behind me, and I was trying to get through that hole, and John was trying to get through, dragging his pants. And when he got home, his mother wondered why he didn't have any pants on and what was in his pants. And he said, "Oh, Mother, I brought you all of this wonderful bat guano for your flower beds." And she said, "Well, John, where did you get it?" He said, "Oh, I just found it." She never knew the story behind this. Anyway, that was, we had lots of good fun.
That sounds exciting. You're the first one that's brought up the caves
Uh,
out of that whole group.
well,
Tell me something else they haven't told me about what y'all did.
Oh, well, that's probably the most adventurous. There were a lot of hunting stories, and John, if John didn't tell you that about Chuck cooking the duck, that John and Chuck had been duck hunting, and Chuck brought the duck home to cook, and he picked it off and all this kind of business, and did everything you needed to do it, and put it in the pan and cooked it, and was putting it in it, and wondered why it didn't smell very good. Well, he forgot to gut it, and Chuck was. Anyway, that one went out
Did
into
y'all
the trash.
go swimming in the river?
A lot. Swam in the river a lot. The river. We had a lot of picnics at Sewell Park. This was just part of the school thing. However, we all learned to swim as children further down the river, where I think it's the city park now, and there's this little rock house there. That was actually the bathhouse. It later turned out to be a Boy Scout hut that we used, and then the next door to it was, I think that was called the VFW Hall, the big rock building next door. We had a lot of school dances there, but we all learned to swim in the river, and I was just thinking the other day, I don't remember if we had lifeguards or not. I know we had they were swimming lessons for those who wanted them, and I was just I couldn't remember lifeguards or not, but I don't ever remember anybody drowning. Don't ever remember anybody having any real distress. But we swam all day. We'd go in the morning and then go home for lunch and rest and come back and swim in the afternoon. One of the big exciting things to do is to see if you could swim up the river to Sewell Park. That was all upstream, and there was lots of seaweed and wild rice and stuff at the time, and you had to swim through that, and I didn't like that. That didn't appeal to me. But you had to do it to prove to earn your medal, and all of our school teachers in high school were marvelous. Every teacher seemed to have an interest in each of us individually.
Yancey Yarborough.
That was the principal, and how many words it is that you didn't want to hear is go to the principal's office. Because Mr. Yarborough was a no-nonsense guy. Fair, east, straight down the line. And he'd been a former officer in the Army during the war, and so he ran school with an iron fist.
Young kids would be surprised to hear about licks.
The
paddles. Every teacher had a paddle,
right.
And you certainly didn't act up because
That's
you
right.
would get paddled.
That's right.
Nowadays, that's unheard of.
Oh, well, gosh,
You'd be arrested as a teacher, I guess.
Absolutely, no question. The ag teacher, Mr. Lost it again, was a routine regular paddler up on top of the hill. The ag building was on top of the hill. And the high school is on Moore Street and Hopkins, I think, is the street.
It was the Lamar School. Is that where y'all went to high school?
Oh, that was high school. It was opened, I think, in 1953.
Right. And y'all were one of the first classes
yes, right,
to graduate
right.
from there?
Probably the second or third. If it opened in 50, let's see. No, maybe. Let's see. If we moved over there as freshmen, that'd be ninth grade. No, it was 10th grade. 10, 11, and 12 we were there. We finished the ninth grade over at the university. So 55, 53, that'd be 52. So maybe it opened in 1950, 51 maybe. And so it was still pretty new.
State of the art.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Air conditioning. Big time.
Yeah.
And we had school plays and orchestra events and band events and the Ms. Houston, the English teacher, was the epitome of a lady. She always wore a black skirt, a white blouse, and her hair in a severe bun. And she wasn't very big. But if there was ever anyone who had absolute control over a classroom, that was Miss Houston.
And what did y'all wear to school? Girls wore dresses and...
We wore blue jeans and shirts. Mother made all of our shirts. I had plaid shirts. With pearl button shirts, pearl snap shirts. Mother made all of my shirts.
And girls wore dresses,
Right.
no pants.
Right.
And bobby socks.
Right. I don't ever. You know, you're right. I think only on hay rides. Now we had a hobo day when you could dress up.
People
you know.
talk about Hobo Day. That must have been a big thing.
Well,
Tell us about Hobo Day.
Well, they just dressed up in your worst clothes, and you could even put a little makeup on, look like a hobo. And
Did you go to the river
Yeah.
and have picnics
Right.
all day at the
Mhm.
river?
Mhm.
Or
It was
kind of like today's field day, I think.
Well, yes,
Towards
and
the
it was
end
a
of the
sack
year.
lunch day.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't remember ever attending anything that was catered in any way. Everybody had sack lunches. You brought what you wanted.
Right.
And ended up sharing with everybody else, you know.
And I guess on weekends, where did you take your dates? To the movies, or what'd y'all do?
Movies was about it. Miller's Drive-In. I always like to think. I always tell my wife that what a cheap date she was. That I worked at the movies at the time, so I could get in free, and I could sneak popcorn for nothing for her. And but the movie cost 35 cents at the time. And then afterwards, we'd go to Miller's Drive-In and have a Coke for a nickel and fries for a nickel. So about 15 cents was all I'd have to spend on her.
Where was Miller's Drive-In?
It was out now on the corner of Ocarina Drive, and there's a motel that sits right on that corner there. It's on the university side.
Right.
It's on that access road right there's Miller's Drive-In. And Keith Miller was a classmate of ours. His family had that drive-in, and there was a really drive-in. They had hostesses came out to your car.
How did that work?
Oh, I'll tell you, it worked fine. You know.
You rolled down your window and they
That's
put,
right. They had that tray they put there. Just. You know.
Was your Coke in a glass?
Yes.
Not plastic.
No. No.
And how much was the Coke?
A nickel, and fries were a nickel, as I recall. Hamburgers, I think, were 25 cents or something like this. But I never did spend my money on hamburgers.
Sounds like you were a hard-working young man.
Well, it was, but you know.
Sounds like you worked harder than those other guys we've interviewed. They didn't tell us about part-time jobs or the caves. They talk about the river a lot.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I fished the river a lot. My mother was a big fisherman. She and I fished the river a lot. And right now, you hear all the stuff about Capes Camp and all that kind of business.
Yeah.
That's where we fished.
What kind of fish did you catch?
We
back
catch
then?
bass and catfish.
Pretty
perch.
good size.
Well, for San Marcos River, snapped at the time. You know, nothing. But it was just fun to catch fish.
Well, another big difference, it seems like the land, most of it was public, and you could go, or you knew the people. And,
Well, we knew the people, you know.
but nowadays,
Well,
not so much.
I won't comment on river behavior right now. since we live on the river in Martindale.
Oh, you do. Bless your heart.
And,
Well, it was an idyllic time, it sounds like. The 50s in San Marcos. The war had ended. Y'all grew up here in a real special time, apparently.
And you know, I can remember something else that I remember well is that, you know, in the 50s, there was the big polio epidemic. And that was the introduction of the iron lung. That was before we had intubation and external respiratory stuff like that. And the iron lung was a metal tube about 6 or 8 feet long that the person's head stuck out of, and it increased the pressure and relaxed it and forced the thorax to open and close so these people could breathe that were paralyzed.
And they lived in the iron lung.
Yes, yes. Now, a lot of these people recovered just from the ravages of the disease, you know, and you know, it's an interesting thing that after the advent of the polio vaccine, I practiced medicine for 45 and a half years. I never did see a case of polio. Never
But
did.
you saw it as a child in San Marcos.
Yes, yeah. And that at that time it was referred to as infantile paralysis. The name polio didn't come out until Salk actually came up with his vaccine. And of course, you know, this is what President Roosevelt had.
Right.
The reason he was paralyzed, and he was kind of the poster child for infantile paralysis, so to speak.
Do you remember any big events that happened during your youth in San Marcos? Big weather, political, or just something big that happened that you remember? A fire or?
No, well, I remember the big flood, and I'm not sure, but it's either 52 or 53, when I-35 out of the Blanco River was underwater, and that the thing that I remember about that is that there's a gravel pit. Right now on that same side there's a cement premix plant on that side, and they had a huge drag line, and only the tip of the drag line was sticking out, and I can remember that. I don't remember anything else of any magnitude. Now the big I was gone in the big flood of '83, I think it was. I'm not sure where. Purgatory Creek flooded town real bad. But you know, my daddy being worked for the LCRA, any of these disaster type things, they were immediately called out because of the power loss and the danger of down power lines. An interesting thing about my daddy is that he was the only one who would climb the poles at the ballpark to replace the lights. No one else would climb that high. So it was up to him to climb, and they climbed it with hooks. You know, they had no buckets or anything, and I don't know how tall those poles were, but you know, stadium lights were high. So when they'd burn out, they'd call Papa. He'd go out there, climb out there.
And he worked for the LCRA his whole career.
His whole career, and you know, all those hours that he spent on poles, and when you're locked in with your hooks on a pole, and you have your safety belt and it's locked around you, that you have to lock your knees in order to stay. And those guys were, if they were setting up transformer, they had to be all done by hand. They'd have a guy on the ground and a hand line, and they'd pull this transformer up by hand. And you had to be locked up there for 2 or 3 hours in order to hang in that transformer. Well, it eventually wore his knees out. He lived to be 97, but he had the worst knees I believe I ever saw of anybody. They never had them replaced or anything. He said, it's not too bad. And his knee was shaped about like that, you know, and he could hardly walk. He said, they're not hurt. I have your knees pop. They're not too bad.
Now, did your brother, you left high school and went to college? Where'd you go to medical school?
I went to college up here in Southwood, Texas State Teachers College. As a matter of fact, I have a bachelor's degree in chemistry, and Sally graduated the next year, Sally, my wife, and that was the year the college changed. So her degree says Southwest Texas State University.
It was Southwest
They
Texas
dropped the
Teachers
Teachers
College.
Right, they dropped the Teachers
So
College.
you graduated from the Teachers College.
Right.
And
And she
And
did
how long have y'all been married?
56 years. And after I finished here, I went to school in Galveston and lived 4 years there. And Sally and I were married at the end of my sophomore year. So we were married 2 years down there, and that's when our oldest son was born down there. And then I did an internship in Corpus Christi, and the minute I stepped out that door, I was drafted. And of course, I had all kinds of deferments, just all since when I started college.
Now, was that during Korea or
Well,
Vietnam?
well, actually, the first part was
Guess-
at the end of the Korean War, and then the end of the Vietnam War. And so actually, though I did not actually serve in Vietnam, I flew in and out. I spent all my time in Japan. We spent a little over 3 years in Japan at the U.S. Air Force Hospital at Tachikawa there. And we flew in and out of Vietnam. And this was just before the Vietnam became a war. This was when they just had advisors.
Right.
But they were, and this is where most of this was taking place in Cambodia. So we were getting casualties out of Cambodia and Vietnam at the same time. And this was before they became of a significant magnitude in number, so that they were shipping them to the Philippines. But we were getting most of them in Japan. So I'm technically a Vietnam veteran, but I never actually served on the ground there in Vietnam.
And then you practiced 30 years in Kingsville.
went to King-
What was your specialty?
Family practice.
Okay.
I did everything that a country family doctor should do. I delivered 3,000 babies, and I did general surgery and orthopedics I didn't do any open orthopedics of any kind, and I made house calls.
See, that's when I grew up. My mother's best friend's husband was a doctor, and it's hard for me to go to the doctor anymore because it's so different.
It is.
That's the kind of doctoring I was used to.
funny-
The best kind.
One of my funniest doctoring stories is that about 2 o'clock in the morning, my phone rang. And this was a patient, and she said, "Oh, Dr. Hotz, do you treat worms?" And I said, "Well, yes, I do, but wouldn't it be just as well for you just bring your child in the office in the morning so I can treat him?" She said, "Oh, it's not about my child, it's about my dog. My dog has worms." And I said, "Well, why didn't you call your veterinarian?" "Oh, I couldn't wake him up at this hour."
So then you moved back and you practiced here in San Marcos.
Yes.
Where was your office here?
Well, actually, I worked for, I had a private practice in a sense, but I was associated with Central Texas Medical Associates. And my office was up by, it's just down from the hospital across the street from Med Park Pharmacy.
And what year did y'all come back to San Marcos?
95.
So how did you find San Marcos when you came back after all those years?
We came back as strangers. You don't come home. If you ever leave, you don't come home. You come back to where you used to live. Our place on Ranch Road 12 had been sold, and everything.
What's there now?
Well, the house is still there that we lived in. Well, actually.
Can you see it from the road?
Oh yeah, yeah, oh yeah.
It's past the cemetery.
Right. Well, it's they're about 1,000 houses past the cemetery now, but
Yeah.
at the time it was the third house. But it's well, there's Tex Houston used to live across this road. This was almost directly across. At the time that we were kids, people by the name of Carnes, Mr. Carnes, had lived there and then where the gravel pit was, that was where the.
What do you find the most different about San Marcos these days?
I get lost in town. There are some basic streets that I grew up with. I recognize those streets, but there are so many other streets that it's just like if we were driving out on Ranch Road 12 to go to where we live, all of that on the other side where it used to be dove hunting and fields and stuff. That's all houses. We were driving out there the other day, and Sally and I were just completely lost. I mean, it was just.
Now they call it Old Retro 12. They've got a new Retro 12.
That's exactly
It doesn't even
right.
have the same name as this road.
That's right. Most of the people that we grew up with are gone. The familiar downtown is not the familiar downtown anymore. It's kind of sad, but I can't stand in the way of progress, if that's what you want to call it. You know, I guess we all have a tendency to live in the good old days, whatever those were. But we have a real good time maintaining contact with our classmates, and we're good about having reunions. We had our 60th class reunion here last year.
And how many people attended?
Oh, I think probably we had 40 all told, and I think maybe 25 or 30 were classmates. The rest were spouses. Everybody that attended seemed to be in good health. A very interesting thing about our class is that out of our class there were four physicians, and I think 4 attorneys, and lots of school teachers. I would think that probably 80% of our class got a college education.
Well, Johnny Sarour went on to be a
Brigadier General in the Air Force. Yes, he did.
And he has moved back.
Yes.
So out of that group that you meet with on Tuesday, several never left, and then a bunch have come.
Well, actually,
not back home, as you say.
Actually, David Burgum, who is a physician, left and came back after he retired. Of course, John Sarour came back. I came back. Now, Tom Hamilton never left, and Tom Hamilton is the guy who has the rental places. What are they called?
Storage.
Oh,
The storage places. They're Tom Thumb.
Okay.
Tom Thumb. And now McBride Wilson is back now, and I don't know if he came back and still had a practice here or not, but
he did.
But he was in Austin for a while.
He was a CPA.
Right. Now Frank Contreras meets with us, and Frank was a principal of schools around and ended up being a coordinator of student coordinator at the university. And
White, somebody White.
Yeah, Bill White is a physician. He's a neurosurgeon. He lives in Austin right now, but he lived in El Paso for a while and then worked for the VA in Temple.
And he drives from Austin to have breakfast with you guys?
Occasionally. Mm-hmm. And Jack Holland was a math teacher at university and high schools, and he recently died was in an automobile accident. Lived at Wimberley. Patricia Arnold, Patricia Dalton.
Here is what I found.
Was a school teacher, and she lives in Wimberley. Clifford Vetters, who was our class clown, I guess, is still around and lives here, but he's originally from Wimberley. One of the funniest guys I ever knew in my life, and he's still just as funny. I see him at Whataburger, and Clifford never has a civil word for me. No, I'd for him, but that it's mutual. But nicest guy. I tell you, just so funny. And our class was a very successful class. Very successful.
It was a wonderful time to grow up, I think, in San Marcos.
It was, they're just such good memories. such good memories. I was trying to think if, I think about everything that transpired while I was working at Hilburn's Pharmacy. That was really a hub at the time of activity because it was called Gary Air Force Base at the time, and seeing that was probably 1950, 51, 52, and there were a lot of Air Force guys came in there, and we, there was a lot of conversation there, and a lot of pretty girls coming in, a lot of flirting with the GIs, and carrying on, and I learned everything there was to learn about a soda fountain, and I ended up being a short order cook, and then that all the peculiarities of the people who came in the drugstore regularly, and then there was Coggins jewelry around the corner, Dollahide shoes, and all of those guys on that side, Bob Van Gundy from the from the hardware store, and Mr. Dollahide, and probably Tommy Coggin, and they met at the local drugstore there. And then there was a barbershop down the Barton Gill's barbershop, which was down there where I got my haircut. And there was the barbers were always such clowns. And you got a little old kid, you coming in there, and then you got there, that pat you on the head and said, "Okay, give me the girl catcher." Put all that stuff on there, and smell good. And you think, "Yeah, what's going on? All these girls hanging out with you." And I remember there was one guy. He'd always hang up his clippers, and he said, "Okay, guys, I'm going next door to get a cup of coffee and a slice of Chinaberry pie." I can't remember who he was, but that was his signature, Chinaberry pie. And one of the things I remember just so vividly is up the street toward the university now. That went all the way up to the top. Well, there was a small barber shop there that was just one room, and his name was Dowden, Barber Dowden. And Papa always took us there to get our haircuts because they were 25 cents. And I never figured out this: if an adult got a haircut, Mr. Bowden cut the hair with electric clippers. If you were a kid, he cut your hair with hand clippers. Well, when you're cutting hair with hand clippers, the last clip never cuts. It just hangs. And so they'd flip the hair off, and they'd pull the hair out of your head. It was awful. And he'd be clipping up, flip the hair off, and pull all the hair out of the back of your head, And so I think, why in the world do we have to get our haircuts there? So I don't know why we ever quit or what, but I can remember every time I see hand clippers, I get cold chills. I think about pulling the hair off the back of your head. And why he had to cut kids with hand clippers? Why not use? I think that was part of the ritual of maturation, kind of like the Maasai in Africa have to kill the lion. I think you had to get your hair cut with hand clippers to get passed over. What's?
You have any final statements or any thoughts about?
My life has been perfect. Growing up in San Marcos was the best thing that could have happened to me, second only to marrying Sally. And I've made friendships that last a lifetime, and they're just irreplaceable. I have the finest friends in the world, and I cherish every minute of it.